Chapter 22, Vivian. Vivian Lee had always been a good observer. It was the first skill her mother had taught her long before swordplay, long before negotiation, long before the art of seduction or doublespeak. She learned to watch and, even more importantly, to listen. Listen longer than they think you are, Lady Mexian had once said. And you'll know them better than they know themselves. So she watched and listened. From the shadowed gallery above the inner courtyard, where incense burned low and paper lanterns glowed with the softened promise of morning, below, Ethan Joe moved through his sword forms. No flash, no aura flaring off his blade, no elemental flourish or chi bloom, just breath, steel, and unshakable control. Thrust, parry, head strike, slash, repose, basic movements, solid footwork. He was precise in a way that was maddening, centered in a way that annoyed her. She'd seen him take Qinglin's silence without hesitation, watched him fold it into his grip like it had been waiting for him. He never boasted about it. He trained alone every morning early enough that he thought no one noticed. But the truth was, everyone noticed. Her father, her mother, her brothers, their retainers. They all saw the quiet Joe son-in-law rise with the sun, train until breath became discipline, then wash, dress, and vanish into whatever studies consumed him. What did he study? She had no idea. Vivian hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 weeks. He hadn't sought her out either, which was slowly driving her mad. The Empire still whispered about him, quietly, like a story no one wanted to admit they believed. He moved like someone unafraid to be seen failing. The sword didn't reject him. He knelt and still won. He hadn't gone drinking with her brothers, hadn't shown his face at the dueling pits, hadn't indulged in the world-class brothels of Moonlight City, hadn't tried to prove anything. He was, in all measurable ways, irrelevant. And yet, no one said his name lightly. No one ignored him when he spoke. Vivian stepped back from the railing and returned to her chamber. The tea was cold, the scrolls untouched. She couldn't focus. Not lately. She still saw Jin Shun, who had been beaten by her family but was recovering. They still talked about politics, sect disputes, unfinished poetry. He was still handsome, still charming. Just last week, he'd brought her a charm bracelet. She'd smiled, thanked him. It probably cost him a month's salary. She hadn't worn it. She couldn't bring herself to, because if she wore it, her husband might see. And that was a complication she didn't feel like explaining. 2 years ago, when she and Jin reconnected, her heart had stuttered when he looked at her. That had surprised her. Now it still fluttered, just not as much. He still called her Vi, still looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world. But lately, it felt like he was waiting for a version of her that no longer existed. And worse, something she wouldn't admit aloud. She didn't miss him as much when he left. Not like she thought she would. It was almost ironic. She had told her husband, her blood bond, that he was banned. Banned from her bed, her heart, and her proximity. And now the one she supposedly banned him for was slowly losing space in her heart. This wasn't the way it was supposed to go. The knock was polite. 2 soft taps against the lacquered wood of her study door. Vivian didn't look up. Yes? The door opened. Ethan Joe stepped in with his usual quiet grace. Robes crisp. Hair damp. He looked recently bathed, refreshed. Composed and handsome. The bastard. How dare he come to her room looking so composed. And handsome. Damn it. He gave her a polite nod. Not a bow. Not awkward. He looked. Finished. Like this wasn't a conversation. Just a scheduled line item. I'll be leaving for a few days, he said. The traditional return to the bridegroom's household. His grin twitched wider. Though I suppose this time it's the return to the groom's parents. Vivian blinked once. Your parents? He nodded. My mother's expecting me. It's customary. You might not know this, but it's usually the wife who returns to her birth home after the wedding. She brings gifts, apologies, grovels, that sort of thing. She set her scroll down, deliberate and careful. Yes, I'm familiar with the custom. She was. She'd watched her brothers do it. The lot of them. They'd made fun of the tradition, but followed it anyway. Her eyes met his. You'll be bringing gifts for my in-laws? Yes, Ethan said. They were already arranged. I selected them ahead of time. Nothing exclusive, but enough to satisfy protocol. Modest, respectable. My mother and sisters will love them. Vivian raised a brow. I won't embarrass the house, he added softly. Of course you won't. You would never do anything inappropriate. She didn't say it. I know you're busy, he said. I don't expect you to come with me. Her spine straightened. You don't expect me to come? He shook his head. Traditionally, the husband, or in this case, the wife, might attend. But it's not required, especially in noble pairings like ours. I thought it best not to impose. Her jaw tightened. I see. My mother will be disappointed not to meet you, he added. But she understands the nature of our marriage. Vivian looked at him fully then. He wasn't provoking her, which just irritated her more. She had barely seen him this month. She had expected that, wanted it even. But now he stood here, telling her he would represent the Lee family, that he'd already arranged the gifts, prepared the apologies, excused her absence, and never once asked her to come. He didn't even consider asking, as if she weren't part of the arrangement, as if he didn't need her to be. That's all then? She said, voice like polished ice. He nodded. I'll be gone no more than 3 days, likely after you leave for your White Lotus sect retreat. I'll probably be in the city after that, working on my lab. She said nothing. She studied him, and the more she looked, the less she understood. He was going home after a month in her household, wearing her name, and he sat there with that contented look on his face. Vivian blinked. It hadn't even occurred to her, not once, what it must feel like to be the groom and still play the bride, returning home with gifts, tribute, apologies, as though he had been traded away. She might have expected a man to resent that, be humiliated by it, but Ethan seemed faintly amused. Are you embarrassed? She asked suddenly. That earned a flicker of surprise. He snorted. Embarrassed? She nodded. To return with gifts like a married daughter, wearing my name, living in my house. Ethan tilted his head, a wry glint in his eyes. No, I knew what I was marrying into. She studied him, and for the first time she couldn't decide whether that made her respect him more or feel something dangerously close to guilt. That's all then? She said coolly. He winked. Don't miss me too much. She paused. The wink threw her off so much she had to stifle a laugh. Something almost like a smile touched her lips. He turned to go, then paused at the door. Traditions are strange things, he said, especially the ones that ask you to bow for something you never asked to be given. The door clicked shut behind him. Vivian sat perfectly still. Vivian hadn't moved since the door shut. She remained at her desk, spine straight, gaze fixed on the closed doorway as if Ethan might return, as if she might call him back. She didn't. She wouldn't. Her tea had gone cold. Again. She reached for it anyway, sipping as if nothing was wrong, as if something hadn't shifted. Then came the second knock. Light. Rhythmic. May. Vivian didn't look up. Come in. May entered with a satisfied little smirk and a scroll tube cradled in both hands like a gift she was far too proud of. Well, she said brightly, now that your husband has abandoned you, shall we review the material? Vivian gave her a look. He didn't abandon me. Right. May dropped the scroll onto the table. Let's call it a tactful exit, then. Vivian unrolled the scroll. I didn't ask for a background check. You didn't stop me either. She glared but picked up the scroll, which was densely written, annotated in May's tiny script. Investigation. Ethan Joe of the House of Joe. Vivian read the first lines and paused. Imperial Academy? Yes. As you know, the Imperial Academy is one of the top 3 in the Empire, May said, already pouring a second cup of tea for herself. Graduated early. Honors in alchemical theory, applied cultivation science, and arcane infrastructure. Triple major. He won 2 independent research grants. One of them was shut down for pushing into bloodline stability testing without oversight. Vivian's brow arched. Impossible. Is that even allowed? Oh, it gets better, May said, sipping. He was shortlisted for a personal apprenticeship under the Imperial Registry, but withdrew before it finalized. No one knows why. They say he has eidetic memory. Vivian looked up. So he's brilliant. What is eidetic memory? Scary brilliant. It means he remembers everything he sees, reads, or hears with perfect recall. She scanned down the page. Medical alchemy. Core resonance theory. Artifact calibration. the kind of projects nobles begged their heirs to be part of. And yet here, Ethan was married into her family, training alone at dawn and quietly disappearing into studies no one asked about. Was he a research specialist or a combat developer? Research, May said, mostly. But he was also part of the Imperial Experimental Combat Group for 2 terms. His goal was to try to codify combat learning. Vivian's mind flashed to the match with Nathan. The way Ethan had moved. Not strong, but fluid. Too fluid for a pure scholar. She kept reading. Then she found it. A name buried in the social ties section. Claire Wang. May raised her eyebrows. Ah, there we are. Vivian's fingers tensed. He was involved with her. I knew that. May continued without looking up. Long term. Started in their pre-academy days, but really began courting in university. No formal engagement, but apparently she visited his dorm more often than she visited her lectures. Vivian didn't realize she'd spoken aloud until the words were out. Why would you look into that? May blinked. I look into everything. I know you wanted me to, and you'd be pissy until I did, but you were never going to ask. Vivian scowled. It's irrelevant. Of course it is, May said sweetly. But if I had to share a name with someone, I'd want to know who used to whisper it. Vivian rolled the scroll back with too much force. The room went quiet for a moment. She turned away from the desk, stared out the window. He was gone now, headed toward a home she'd never seen. A mother she hadn't met. A life she'd made no attempt to understand. She had told herself she didn't need to. That the marriage was functional. Political. Clean. She was Vivian Lee. She commanded relationships. She didn't ask for them. May cleared her throat behind her. There's one more thing. Vivian didn't turn. Let's hear it. Well, May said slowly. Apparently the Joe family has neighbors. A minor noble-class couple. Hardworking. Not terribly influential. And their daughter. Marie-Celine. 18. Right. Apparently she's very taken with your husband. Vivian turned. May tried and failed not to grin. She's been vocal. Claims she's going to marry him someday. She wants all the babies. Her parents are planning to visit while Ethan's home. You know, coincidentally. Vivian said nothing, but the cold inside her shifted. Are you suggesting I should be jealous? She asked finally. Of a child? May said, waving a hand, ironically ignoring that Vivian was only 20 herself. No, but the appearance of inattention can be damaging. You are, after all, the heir to House Lee. Vivian's face smoothed over. Yes, I am. And leaving your husband unaccompanied on his return visit while rumors swirl and neighbors bring their daughters might suggest. May trailed off. Vivian didn't need it said. She turned back to her desk, sat slowly, took a breath, then stood again. Tell the royal stylist I'll need to depart within 2 hours. May blinked. We're going? Vivian nodded. I won't have it said that the heir of House Lee allowed her husband to be paraded around like an unattended servant. May bowed low, eyes dancing. Understood. Vivian looked toward the road that led toward the outer gates. He was probably halfway there by now. Still calm. Still unreadable. That was fine. Let him be unreadable. She'd remind the world exactly whose name he wore.
Chapter 23, Daniel. Daniel wasn't expecting anyone to be waiting when he stepped into the outer courtyard in the middle of the day. The sky was pale gold, the stones still cool underfoot. He wore the formal traveling robe he'd been issued, after the wedding muted gray with understated gold trim. It felt ceremonial enough to pass without drawing attention. That was the goal. Leave quietly. Be respectful. Handle the visit. Return. No fuss. Assuming you can control yourself around your asshole brother, Daniel thought toward Ethan. And your former flame, of course. He could almost feel Ethan's snort in response. But he stopped short when he saw Lord Li Junhua already standing at the courtyard edge, flanked by 2 house stewards and a servant holding a scroll case. Daniel bowed instantly, deeper than usual. My lord, I didn't expect... Junhua raised a hand. Spare the formality this morning, my son-in-law. Daniel straightened cautiously. Lord Li didn't smile, but there was no steel in his expression either. I had hoped to accompany you today, he said. Tradition favors it, but something requires my attention within the intersect. It can't be helped. Daniel nodded. He hadn't expected Zhenhua to come. He couldn't even get his wife to accompany him. Of course, it humbles this son-in-law that Lord Zhenhua even considered the tradition. Zhenhua gave a rare smile. Fear not, my son-in-law. Your parents will be properly honored. I will send formal word. Extend an invitation for them to visit us properly when it's appropriate. They raised a fine son. I'd like to thank them in person. Daniel blinked. That was more than he expected. Far more. Thank you, my lord, he said, voice even. They'll be honored. He was about to step back. Assumed the conversation was over when Lord Li gestured toward the waiting carriage. It was a full Li family ceremonial coach-crested, rune-etched, warded in layers he could feel from several feet away. 2 elite riders stood beside it, one bearing his personal seal. You'll ride in that, Zhenhua said plainly. It's properly warded and properly staffed. More importantly, it sends the right message, that the son-in-law of the Li family is not to be trifled with. Daniel's throat tightened. He bowed again. You're being too generous, my lord. Zhenhua glanced at him. Nonsense. I would do as much for my sons. He turned to the stewards. Show him the second. Daniel followed their movement, confusion growing until a second carriage rolled forward. Smaller than the first, but heavier. Guarded on all sides. It was made of reinforced stonewood, and the sigils along its base shimmered with security enchantments. The lead steward opened the back panel and gestured inside. Weapons polished and at least epic grade. Sealed boxes of elixirs, some already marked for internal stabilization use. A weighty purse, imperial standard coinage, and finally a scroll case and an embossed land deed. Deliver these to your parents, Lord Li said. From House Li to House Zhou, Daniel stared. Zhenhua continued, voice flat but not unkind. It's tradition. We send a dowry return. And this is a small gesture of thanks for raising someone we're proud to claim. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then bowed again deeper this time. I will deliver them personally, and tell them everything of your grace and honor, my lord. Zhenhua nodded once. I expect no less, son-in-law. Without another word, the lord of House Li turned and walked away, leaving a thoroughly bewildered Daniel in his wake. I swear you've bewitched this entire group. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. The final scroll had just been sealed in the storage case when a steward approached with a small velvet box in hand. For you, the man said, bowing. From the Patriarch. Required for all outbound communication. I am told it's the latest model, not even in stores yet. Daniel opened it. Inside was a crystal roughly the size of a small egg-dark blue, faceted like obsidian, but alive with light beneath the surface. As he touched it, the internal lattice shifted threads of gold and white flickering like circuitry, forming slow, deliberate pulses. It didn't feel like a gem. It felt like a magical smartphone spell-threaded, state-bound, tuned to an invisible network. A communication device, a locator, a tracking system, a tool for surveillance and connection. Elegant and terrifying all at once. Activate it, the steward said. Your identity must be bound to the signal registry. Daniel raised the crystal to his lips and whispered the default seal break phrase. The crystal glowed faintly. Then Lord Li's voice came through clear and formal, touched with just enough warmth to feel unsettling. Ethan, this communication crystal is registered with the State Messaging Authority. It will allow you to relay messages directly to the estate and other licensed recipients. Directional projection, long-range pulse linking, encrypted data transfer, it's all there. You're expected to check in regularly. And the estate is too quiet without your voice in it. The light faded. Daniel stared at the crystal in his palm. It was, functionally, a smartphone. A magical state-tracked smartphone. Encrypted. Monitored, connected to systems he didn't yet understand. Built for a clan heir and tethered to a network that reminded him who was watching. He had no idea what to say, so he said nothing at all. He stepped toward the carriage, handing the crystal off briefly so it could be registered into the regional scrying index. One of the estate's logistics officers murmured a few incantations and handed it back, sealed with the Li crest. As the servants completed final checks, movement on the far side of the courtyard caught his eye. Vivian. She stood in her formal outer robe, flanked by 2 aides deep in discussion. She looked radiant, sharp, completely uninterested in him. But then, briefly, her gaze flicked over. Daniel raised a hand, just a wave. No flourish. She didn't smile, but she nodded. And somehow, that was enough. He climbed into the carriage and sat back, letting the motion of the wheels cradle him as the estate gates fell behind. Chapter 24, Caleb. The carriage rocked softly beneath him, the wheels humming over stone as the city began to thin behind them. Trees blurred past the window. Low walls rose and fell like breath. The steady rhythm of travel gave him time to think, something he did too much of lately. Claire sat across from him, calm as ever, her hair braided high, her eyes focused on a tactical projection crystal displaying the tournament bracket preliminaries. She hadn't looked at him once. Caleb didn't mind. She'd look when it mattered. He leaned his head back, fingers laced behind it, eyes half-lidded. From the outside, he was relaxed, powerful, controlled. But inside, he was burning, not with rage, with purpose. People were getting it twisted again. He'd been reborn into this world with memory, drive, and vision. A rare, brutal gift. And what had he done with it? He'd reclaimed what should have been his. Claire Wang, the rising star of the Wang family. The girl who'd ascended in the last life into something mythic, untouchable. Who would have crushed demons on the battlefield and rebuilt entire sects in her wake? He had her now. Not Ethan. Not the scholar. Him. But nothing sat right. The Empire had started whispering Ethan Joe's name. Not loudly. Not like Caleb's. But enough. Enough that it bothered him. He remembered the footage. The star-forged sword Chinglin's silence, placed in Ethan's hands as if it were the most natural conclusion. The duel with Nathan. The kneeling moment with Jin Sun. People had called it restraint, dignity, strategy. Caleb snorted softly. It was a performance. Ethan had always been clever, cautious, good at surviving. He'd probably done something smart, something politically neat, and now Lord Lee had decided he was useful for a little while. But when the Lee family started to fall apart, and Ethan would be discarded like a broken sword. Vivian didn't want him. The marriage hadn't even been consummated. That was the real scandal no one wanted to say too loudly. Caleb had heard the whispers in the brothel parlor just days ago. Vivian's keeping the scholar in the guest wing, and Jun Shun's the one who gets her smiles. Apparently she was livid with him for embarrassing Jin Shun. The rumor's all that bowing and scraping was for show, and Lady Lee saw right through it. It was obvious. Vivian hadn't looked at Ethan. There was no way he could have come up with such a brilliant political move on his own. Clearly, it was Lord Lee trying to undermine Vivian's attachment to Jin Shun, but nothing had changed. Vivian always gravitated toward people like Jin Shun, not out of love, so in Caleb's humble opinion, out of control. Jin Shun would never challenge her. Ethan might try, but not enough to matter. He was weak, and weak men couldn't stand up to Vivian Lee. And when House Lee finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance, Vivian would lean more and more on Jin Shun. Who would eventually betray her? Caleb was looking forward to watching it. And Ethan? Ethan would either be dead, tossed aside, or infected with whatever sickness was rotting the Lee family from the inside. That was fine, because Caleb had plans. He just had to figure out how Claire did it. In the last life, she had ascended fast. Too fast. Her family had money, sure, but not that much power. Not enough to move the way she did until she broke away. She became something larger, more dangerous. He had watched her from a distance, never able to get close enough before it all ended. But now she was his. And if he could just unlock whatever had triggered her growth, he could rise too. Not beside her, in front of her. The real power in the Wang household. The one pulling the strings, not playing the part. He glanced at Claire now, still reading, still composed. And he smiled. She didn't need to love him, though she clearly did. It was too easy. But what he really needed was for her to talk to him. Rely on him. Trust him. Then he would take everything that was his. Let Ethan kneel. Let him be honored like some clever pet. Let him carry gifts and titles and borrowed prestige. Because when the Empire started breaking again, Caleb would be ready. And this time, he wouldn't just survive it. He'd own it. Even his younger sisters, Emily and Elise, 17-year-old twins, emerged from the side hall, wide-eyed and whispering behind embroidered fans. They were just old enough to be impressed without hiding it. Caleb gave them a polished smile. Only his younger brother Ryan stood silently behind their father. 14 now, still growing into his limbs. He watched Claire with quiet intensity, his posture trying to mimic Caleb's. Caleb met his gaze and nodded once. Ryan looked down immediately. Caleb's grin widened. He knew how this would land. Claire was sharp. Claire was a prize. And because Ethan had always been so private, the family didn't really understand the depth of the betrayal when Caleb seduced her out from under him. Not that he should feel guilty for that. His place on high was always destined. It was why he was reborn. Claire bowed with perfect timing, complimented the stonework, smiled in exactly the way their mother had always wanted a daughter-in-law to smile. And now she stood here shining as servants delivered tribute. The gifts were tasteful, expensive, rare. Everything a Tier 2 house should bring when visiting their in-laws. It was still such a contrast from when he returned home in the last timeline. Ethan would experience it too. He would arrive. Alone. No Vivian. No elite entourage. No ceremonial wealth. And when he walked into the same courtyard with the same family, There would be no comparison. Caleb would make sure of it. He took in the lotus blossoms blooming in the back garden, the sound of Claire's voice complimenting his mother's cooking, the way his father's eyes flicked just briefly toward the scroll with the Wang seal. Everything was lining up, and this time, he'd be the one who got it right. The sitting room was warm with the scent of fresh tea and too many expectations. Margaret Jo sat in her favorite chair, porcelain cup in hand, the carved arms of the seat worn smooth by years of family gatherings. She smiled brightly as Claire leaned forward with practiced elegance and placed a second cup into her hands. Claire looked perfect, of course. Not a fold out of place, not a hair out of alignment. She made it all look effortless. To their right, the twins, Emily and Elise, sat side by side on floor cushions, trying and failing to look composed. They were practically vibrating with the excitement of having Claire Wang in their home, the daughter of the Wang house. The woman who had walked into the Zhou household and made it feel like they mattered. Caleb sat just to the left of his father, watching it all unfold like it was a performance meant for someone else. And maybe it was. He leaned back slightly, letting the comfort of the room settle into his bones. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? His mother doting, his sisters fawning, his wife shining like a prize. He was the eldest son. He had returned victorious. So why did it feel like he was holding his breath? The door opened. No fanfare, no announcement. Just the quiet creak of hinges and soft footsteps over polished stone. Ethan walked in, holding a gift bundle, a scroll case, a modest lockbox, and a well-folded cloth parcel tied with a single gold-threaded knot. His robes were simple but clean, tailored with the Lee crest embroidered in muted tones on the sleeve. He bowed first to Margaret, the mother, then to Robert, father, then to the rest of the room. Apologies for my late arrival. Margaret stood, flustered, setting her cup aside with more clatter than usual. Ethan! Oh, it's good to see you. You look well, you look very well. Ethan smiled. You're kind to say so. His voice hadn't changed, but something else had. Caleb stared at him, brow tightening. He couldn't put his finger on it. Ethan's posture was straighter, his steps more assured. There was weight in the room now that hadn't existed a month ago. Something pressed behind his shoulders when he moved. A tension that wasn't arrogance, but wasn't meekness either. Even Claire looked up from her cup. Her eyes sharpened just a little, calculating. And Caleb felt a flicker of heat in his chest. When did he get taller? Ethan handed the gift bundle to Margaret, who opened it slowly. A bundle of well-aged tea from the eastern coast. A set of rare inkstones with silver marbling practical, elegant. A ceremonial shawl for his mother, enchanted against wind and temperature. None of it screamed wealth, but every piece was chosen with care. And it worked. Margaret was beaming. You brought gifts? Caleb asked, smiling as he passed Claire another cup. Ethan nodded. A modest offering. Lady Lee regrets she couldn't attend, but she sends her respects. Lady Lee. Not Vivian. Not my wife. Caleb leaned back, just enough for the words to feel casual. Of course, not every wife gets to attend the return, he said smoothly. Some unions are, more ceremonial than functional. The room dipped into a quiet beat. Robert's gaze shifted. Claire's fingers stilled on the tray. The twins exchanged a quick glance. Only Ethan didn't react. He simply adjusted the sleeves of his robe and replied, The Lee household has many obligations. I'm grateful they allowed me the time. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't a defense. But it made Caleb want to grit his teeth. Margaret cleared her throat too loudly. Well, the gifts are lovely. Truly. I'll wear this at the next harvest dinner. I already know the neighbors will ask where it came from. The twins nodded enthusiastically, already crowding around to peer at the inkstones. Ethan smiled again, just slightly. Robert Jo said nothing, but he was watching. Watching Caleb, watching Ethan, weighing them. And Caleb hated how familiar that felt.